Before I was streaming and making YouTube videos, I was a chess teacher, and over my years, I've probably taught openings to close to 1,000 people. In this video, I'm going to share what I think are the best openings to play to have success across the rating ladder. For beginner, it's probably up to about 1,200, intermediate's about 12 to 1,800, and the advanced section of the video is about 1,800 plus. Of course, if you like any of the openings that you see, you are welcome, more than welcome, to play them at whatever level you are. These are just the ones that I think are the best based on my experience. So we're going to kick things off with beginners and with the white pieces. Now, the opening that I think has the most success at a very early level is the London system. So that begins with the queen's pawn, and then you go for a setup based on the dark squared bishop on f4, and then pawns on e3 and c3, and then knight to f3. And what you do is you add layers to this. You start learning more and more about the London system. The point of this video is to just get you thinking about the right opening. Why do I think this is the best? Because it follows all the basic principles, like fighting for the center, but without any of the drawbacks. Everything you develop is solid. Everything is defended. Your king is very safe, which can be different than playing king's pawn stuff because there's all sorts of tricks and traps. And the game plan in the London as a beginner is honestly not that complicated. I'm just playing, regular recreational moves that you might see with black when you have the white pieces. And the next step of the London is putting the knight on e5 and creating some sort of attack on the king. Sometimes you castle, sometimes you don't, sometimes you castle the other way, sometimes you create a kingside pawn storm, sometimes you break in the center. But the game plan is very easy and your position will look consistent every single game that you play. Another opening after d4 that you can try to go for as a beginner is the Stonewall with e3, something like bishop d3, and then the move f4. And you go for the same thing, except your dark squared bishop stays home, and the difference here is that this pawn is advanced. What that means is in the future, you will have the open rook. So in a perfect world, you still get the knight to the center, just like in the London, but in this version, you also can go here with the rook, so it's a bit more aggressive. It has a positional drawback in the sense that your central square here can be blocked, and if black is able to block it, the position can get closed. But those two openings with white have had the most success over my years of teaching. And if you go for e4 and you play principled stuff, what I would say is this. Play knight f3 on the second move against e5, but e5 doesn't have to happen. Try to put a second pawn in the center if you can, and if you can't because it will get taken, make sure you can at least take back with the knight, if not the pawn. c3 and d4, pawn c3 and then pawn d4 is also very good. You should definitely bring out the bishop. This to me has had the most success, and now fried liver if possible. Check out the fried liver video if you haven't already. And maybe here you play c3 if you don't go for a fried liver so that you can take the center. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have two pawns in the center if you're a beginner. People will melt. If you learn how to control the center with pawns or with pieces and then push into your opponent's position, once you castle and everything is ready to go, you will be very, very happy and you will be able to win a lot of games. Honestly. So that's why I like London and Stonewall, because you lock the center, you take control of it, and then you create an attack on your opponent. And it's one of the reasons I like this c3 d4 idea in the e4 e5 positions, or I mean fried liver, right? Those of you that have watched the fried liver video, you probably understand the power of the fried liver at this level. So be challenging to your opponents within the first 5 or 6 moves, and if you can't, take control of the center with what you can. Simple, easy to understand openings, and then we kind of push the advantage further. That's with white though, and I mean half of our games we're going to be playing with the black pieces, so we have to be Gotham subscriber and they have to be the no-name noob. Now, to me, I almost never taught students e4, e5. I hated the early queen attack, the scholar's mate, I didn't like the gambits. So what I taught so many students at this level was the King's Indian setup, which is d6, knight f6. You would be surprised how many people lose this pawn, by the way, but let's say they protect it. And then g6, bishop g7, and castles. You avoid all 4-move checkmate nonsense. Your king is safe. You control some central space, and then you develop all of your pieces, make this trade if you have to, and then play knight c6, and slowly build up for pawn to e5. Of course, the middle game is difficult to navigate, just in general in the King's Indian, but you make it out of the opening alive, and then after that, if you play safely, you play solidly, you take free pieces when they're available, and that is how you build your experience. You will climb up the rating ladder. The good thing about the King's Indian is it doesn't matter what they play. If they play the London system, you can still play the King's Indian. If they play, whatever, d4, c4 with knight c3, you can still play the King's Indian. So you can play the King's Indian setup against anything. But what if you don't want to? What if you're bored? Another one that I like is the Scandinavian defense. And you would say, well, why would you tell a beginner to get their queen out early? Well, what I told beginners was that, well, if your queen gets attacked, you have a choice. Move it all the way to the side, or move it all the way back. And this is actually not such a waste of time. If you move it all the way back, your next few moves are extremely easy. Pop out both knights, put the bishop on f5 or g4, and the reason why you have to do that is, let's just say bishop c4, castles. Why you have to bring out the bishop is so you can play e6 and bring out the other bishop. If you don't do that, if you just go like this, you block in your bishop. But development here is super simple. Development here is, you don't have to think really. I mean, you just play your pieces out and then you castle, short or long. Sometimes I would tell people to castle long to make the game more complicated, but that's that, right? Like, the Scandinavian defense is a very simple opening to play. And for a last one, you can play the Sicilian, but I would limit it to one and one only Sicilian, and that is the Dragon Sicilian, which plays g6. And you'll notice the bishop on g7, just like in the King's Indian defense, and I would do this because the structure is similar. What does that mean? It means that you play pawn d6, you bring out the knights, and then you castle. So the structure looks very similar. The Sicilian Dragon, the King's Indian setup, and maybe the Scandinavian. But the King's Indian and the London at the beginner level are the two openings that I would prefer for you to play the most. Now, let's go back to the white pieces, and we're entering intermediate territory. So you're like 1100, 1200. You're like, how do I start beating everybody? This is where it gets the most fun. So, to me, the most successful opening you can play in intermediate level after e4, first of all, I actually think e4 is great because now you're studying more openings. So you're learning theory, you're learning the best moves, you're using an openings database, you're using a computer. Let's say you're like 12, 1300, 1100, 12, 1300. Now it's time to start going for the good stuff. First of all, you've got your gambits. You've got things like the Danish gambit or the King's gambit, where you know that by sacrificing pawns early, sometimes as many as giving away 3 pawns for capture, winning 1 back, you can create initiatives and you can create targets of weak squares. Definitely investigate gambits. But the Vienna, oh, it's just my favorite. My goodness, the Vienna is just the best. Go study the Vienna. I can almost guarantee that you will win like 70% of your games against e4, e5. In a perfect world, you play the Vienna Gambit, hoping to overrun them in the center like this. In another perfect world, you get a copycat variation with bishop c5 and go queen g4 and go for g7. So you're learning these kinds of systems and punishing people for playing into them. If you play into a Sicilian, a setup that I really like here is the closed Sicilian with knight c3. The point is that you go g3, kind of like a Vienna, but you build up with the pawns. And what that looks like way down the line is something like this potentially. This knight can go here, here, or here. But what you do is you play h3, g4, f5, and you attack the opponent. That's what you do. You slowly build up your position and you attack the opponent. Vienna and closed Sicilian are fantastic. Not to mention against the Sicilian, there's another gambit, the Smith-Morra gambit, like this, or even something as crazy as the wing gambit. cb4, you take 2 pawns in the center, and you're very happy. I love e4 at the intermediate level. If you want to continue hitting everybody, not with d3, but with the London system, that's fine. You can consider incorporating this tricky move order against the King's Indian defense, which is knight c3, and then castling queenside. This wins a lot of games at the intermediate level, so consider incorporating that. into your territory as well. But definitely e4 and d4 still at intermediate. Build on those fundamentals. Include like some sidelines of mainline openings like two knights against the French, or the advanced Caro Kann, like e4, c6, d4, d5, pawn up to e5, for example, in the Caro Kann, which is a very menacing system that takes space and puts pressure on the opponent. With black at the intermediate level, things are also very fun. This is where against e4, I highly recommend you to learn the Caro Kann. If you've made it this far and you're like 800, consider the Caro Kann as a beginner. The point is, you fight for the center like this, and all you gotta learn here is three things. Do they push? Do they take? Or do they protect their pawn? That's it. And all of them have a very more or less straightforward game plan. If you learn it, there you go. Beautiful. You now know how to play against e4. And many players with the white pieces don't face a lot of Caro Kanns. My subscribers do, but not everybody is a subscriber. Still, some people are no-name noobs. Against d4 at this level, c4 at this level, and even knight f3, any move, literally any move, that's not e4 and maybe g4, play the Dutch. So d4, play the Dutch. The Dutch defense is a reverse Sicilian defense. Yes, you temporarily weaken your king, but what you do is you play knight f6, g6, bishop g7, and castle. And the position that you can get from the opening looks really nice. It looks something like this, where you have the advancement of the f-pawn, and slowly you will build for this e5 push. You'll play d6, you will play knight c6 or knight d7, and queen e8, sliding the queen over to push the pawn into the center with e5. In a perfect world, you will create the same pawn storm that you would in the closed Sicilian. You remember? You were watching earlier. Unless you skipped that part, go back to that part. So, the point of the Dutch is to just, I mean, people play it less than 5% of the time when they have the white pieces. So they've got the white pieces, you have the Dutch, you play it 100% of the time, they play it 5% of the time. Who has the advantage? Me, because you're watching my video. So, queen e8, trying to push e5, and it's all good. I love the Dutch defense at this level. And at this level, you can also start incorporating very tricky stuff like the Traxler. Of course, I made a video on the Traxler, but the point of an opening like the Traxler is it's not necessarily a great opening according to Grandmaster or Engine games, but it works, right? It works. The problem is at a certain level, you'll stop having so much success. Another example, and again, the Traxler is this. It's when you allow the fried liver, but play this very dangerous bishop c5. Again, the point of this the video is to point you in the right direction. I can't give you everything here, but I'm trying to kind of stimulate the thought process as you climb the rating ladder. So knight c6 is, and then this whole thing would be the Traxler. But there's other things. I mean, you can play the Stafford Gambit, Eric Rosen's favorite opening, right? dc6, and now you've played a gambit, you've given away a pawn, but you know the aggressive, tricky nature of this opening, and you can pick up some easy wins. So hopefully that's good for the intermediate level. For the final part of this video, we're talking about 17, 1800 plus. At this point, you're quite a serious player. You've really climbed the rating rank. So what do you need to push you to the next level? So, again, with white, I love e4, and now, I mean, you gotta be putting people under pressure. You can play the main line positions, but you're still not gonna have a degree of mastery yet of the game. You've gotta be thinking about it from a confrontational standpoint. Take people out of mainline theory. Vienna continues to be good, but for example, if you wanna go d4 knight f6, don't allow them to play a King's Indian. Don't let them play a Grunfeld. Don't let them play a Benoni. Trumpowski, one of my favorites, an opening that single-handedly carried me over to master level territory. I was winning like 80% of my games here after bishop g5. The point is, you're just gonna take, and then you're gonna rebuild on the dark squares. You've traded off your dark squared bishop, so you'll play bishop g2, c4, and you just create a nice and solid system. If they play knight to e4, which is the main line, you can play either bishop back or the Raptor variation, it's a lot of fun. The point is to open up this file for the rook, and you're already creating menacing threats like pawn g6, and they would have to take, leaving them with a very damaged structure. Trompowsky is fantastic at this level. You can also consider the Catalan, which will be probably the most solid opening you ever play. Knight to f3, and then g3, bishop g2, and castle with c4. Super solid, no weaknesses, long-lasting pressure on your opponent. The Catalan, oh, fantastic. And at this level, I will say that if you want to play in English, now is the time. I haven't shown this opening yet, but the point of the English is to play knight c3, play g3, play bishop g2, and you can play this Botvinnik style, which means d3 and e4, or you can play e3, knight e2, and d4, and in the English, you oftentimes try to advance on the queen side. It's a very long positional opening, and it relies on your solidity and your long-term strategic planning rather than crazy tactics in the first 10 or 15 moves. So the English is also good at this level to kind of push you over the top. It's just going to be hard because, again, it doesn't have a direct plan per se. You just slowly improve your position to try to make it, kind of maximum. Now with black at the advanced level, again, Caro Kann, oh my goodness, I cannot tell you enough how much I love it. If you want to play e4, e5, what I recommend at this level is in some of these like Ruy Lopez's or Italians that you're going to face a lot, I highly recommend you to play g6 systems. So systems where you turn it maybe into a King's Indian or just go to throw your opponent off their game, or play like a bird variation of a Ruy Lopez. I mean, the bird's variation is very tricky. Again, you'll have 100% games here, and they will have 5%, 10% max. So you can play into the main lines of e4, e5 when you're advanced, but just try to play maybe a sideline of one of those openings because you'll be familiar and they won't. So like a g6 or a bishop g7, check out openings databases, and you will kind of know how to pick things up there. And the last thing with black at kind of this higher level is the trickier Sicilians. So not the dragon, not the Najdorf necessarily, but for example, one of the trickiest Sicilians is like the Nimzowitsch, where you allow e5. Or you can play knight f3, knight c6, or let's say e6, d4, take, and you can play for a two-knight Sicilian, which is not a very theoretical line. And then you can play bishop c5, bishop b4. There's Sicilians where your queen comes out and pressures on this diagonal. So it's not a main line Sicilian, but it's very tricky. The pin variation, there's a lot of different Sicilians which are like main line Sveshnikov. What does Magnus Carlsen play? But just a little bit trickier so you can throw your opponent off their game. And then there's other things. I mean, there's, for example, at this level, the e6, b6 setup. And the e6, b6 setup, you can play against really anything that white plays, but I would recommend it here because it has a little bit of a lack of space. So at the higher level, you'll be better suited to play this because you'll understand that dealing with a lack of space isn't so terrible. Now, I have an e6, b6 course, and what's interesting about my e6, b6 course is that I recommend it for about 1300 plus, and that's fine. There's a lot of tricks to it. But I think that as you climb up the ladder and you're more comfortable dealing with a bit of a lack of space, you will probably have the most success, I would say. And I believe that's basically it. I mean, e6, b6 is good, the trickier Sicilians, the e4, e5 positions. And really the question comes down to, how do I study this and how do I make it work for myself? Well, you have to go... After this, I want all of you to do this. Go check your statistics. I don't care what website you play on, you will be able to track how you do with white and how you do with black. And that is the first step to improvement. Do I lose more games with white or with black? And why? What are my opening repertoires? Where am I usually getting into trouble? Okay, let me give this new one a shot. But we have to remember, statistics can also be skewed because we could be getting good positions in the openings and then losing, or getting horrible positions in the openings and then beating our opponents on the clock. So you have to figure out if your opening is working for you and you're enjoying the position. It's a game-by-game process. Sometimes it takes a sample size of 5 to 10 games to truly figure it out, but the learning curve for successfully learning a new opening can be 30, 40 games, and not all of us have the patience for that, right? Let's admit to that. Don't be so quick to judge an opening. You have to be playing it correctly before you can judge whether or not you are actually having success with it. Hopefully this helps, and I will see you in the next video.